Hello. Welcome back to chapter 16. And I have my guest Trent back with us because now we're talking about dealing with women. And it'd be nice to have a man's perspective. Steve doesn't know shit about women. Part 2, dealing with women. We're on chapter 16. Women are not liars. Keeping your word is a masculine trait, in men or women. A person with a feminine essence may not keep her word, yet it is not exactly lying. In the feminine reality, words and facts take a second place to emotions and the shifting moods of relationship. When she says, "I hate you," or "I'll never move to Texas," or "I don't want to go to the movies," it is often more a reflection of a transient feeling, rather than transient feeling wave than a well-considered stance with respect to events and experience. On the other hand, the masculine means what it says. A man's word is his honor. The feminine says what it feels. A woman's word is her true expression in the moment. Any thoughts?
I think it's a lot of men like the natural response of men is to assume that women are like men. Mm-hmm. And that you mean like women say what they mean and all this kind of stuff. And from my experience, that has not proven correct. And often women have a lot of emotions, a lot of feelings, and a lot of bitterness and resentment that doesn't necessarily get to the surface. So I might not hear about these kind of things until 6 or 12 months later in the relationship. And it's in part because women are very sensitive, and they are very sensitive to your emotional reactions to things. So if they have any inclination that you're going to react negatively to something, it's very likely that a woman's going to hide that, whatever it is that makes you angry in whatever respect. And so what you as a man kind of have to do is make sure you've kind of, I guess, let go of your anger and these emotional reactions that you have. Mm-hmm. And the more stable and conscious and present you can be, and you mean if she does something wrong or she does something that she thinks might upset you, if you're able to stay calm, cool, collected, and it's kind of just like water off a duck's back, then she'll be able to express herself in the moment a lot easier. And I think that makes the relationship a lot more sustainable, because kind of my experience is that the relationship looks perfect from my perspective because there's no conflict, there's no whatever, until she's kind of like a volcano and all this bitterness and resentment has built up to the point where it explodes. And then you mean the relationship's kind of irrevocably damaged at that point. Whereas kind of a more authentic relationship, like you talk a lot of shit to me like all the time, but it kind of really establishes our friendship going forward, because you mean it's a lot more rocky, but it's like those rocks don't build up. You mean you kind of get through them and deal with those negative emotions, whatever problems as they come, instead of harboring them and holding them like this bag on your shoulder of all these negative emotions. You're able to just let things go through, and then you're also able to kind of cycle through into positive emotions as well.
I really like that because it kind of splits the responsibility, because I always felt that it's on me, like I need to learn to be more authentic in my expression, but actually the masculine can really help that if he provides that safe space for her to express herself. But it takes a lot of work on the man's part, working through his trauma and his triggers, which relates to last week's video. I forgot the title. Being imperturbable.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. When you listen to your woman, listen to her as you would the ocean or the wind in the leaves. The sounds you hear from her are sounds of the motion of her feeling energy. Of course, there are times when she speaks in the masculine style of meaning exactly what she says, but more often, and almost always in emotional moments, what she says is the sound of her feelings. Her feminine speech is far more like poetry than like a clear-cut agenda for action. In an emotional moment, what she says she is going to do is actually an expression of what she feels like doing in the moment. Her feelings, and therefore what she is actually going to do, could change in 5 minutes. It could change every 5 minutes.
One thing that makes me think about is that, like, women will ask you if you need to go to the bathroom because they need to go to the bathroom, or women will ask you if you're cold because they're cold. And the natural response of the masculine is, no, I'm not cold. No, I don't have to go to the bathroom. And if I was cold, or if I did have to go to the bathroom, I'd deal with it. You mean I'd go get a coat, or I'd go to the bathroom. Whereas women are much, I guess, more sensitive, or much whatever. It's like, if I'm talking with Stephanie and I have to go to the bathroom, I usually just get up and go to the bathroom. Where she would kind of sit there trying to talk for half an hour with me or something like that, to not hurt my feelings before she wants to go to the bathroom. And often she doesn't even know she needs to go to the bathroom.
I don't know if that's a good example. But okay.
And so for women, it's like you almost have to feel her better than she feels herself. Like, I remember with one of my past relationships, we were at like her sorority house, and we're kind of hanging out talking in the kitchen, and I could tell she was cold. Like, I could just kind of see how her arms were moving, how her body was slanted and stuff like that. And so I gave her my suit jacket, and she resisted, but I was like, no, you're going to take it. And then when she was wearing it, she felt a lot better, and she's a lot more relaxed, and her body language was a lot better, and I think she just enjoyed it a lot more. But as a kind of a superior man, you have to not only understand yourself and kind of focus on your own needs, but you actually need to feel the people around you and kind of be attuned to that, and figure out what you need to provide them to kind of have them having their best experience and stuff like that. So as men, we kind of naturally expect that women will kind of speak up for themselves and say what they need and all that kind of stuff. And I think that the ideas of feminism have kind of promoted that, but I don't think they're right. You mean, I think that women, it's, while there's a place for learning these skills, it's really, as a man, like as a superior man, you got to kind of take this on yourself and do the best you can to provide for the people around you.
Yeah, earlier I didn't like your example, but now it makes sense with your second example, because the gift from the masculine to the feminine is that of consciousness. Like, he's able to see things objectively and give that kind of clear advice, whereas she can get lost in emotions and subjectivity. And
well, she not only gets lost in her own emotions and subjectivity, but she gets lost in everybody else's emotions and subjectivity. Like, oh, this person's like in a really good, like, you mean talking thing or whatever, and like if I left the room right now it would throw them off. Mm-hmm. And like, yeah, there's all these kind of emotions that I think as a man, at least I don't feel. It's just like when we were doing our move out inspection yesterday, I was just bored, so I went off and like started to look at like the window because they were doing some construction work, and I was like, oh, that's more interesting. And then the move out person was like, do you care about this? And I'm like, no. And it's just like, it doesn't even like, you mean, come across my mind to like care about these kind of things. But as a woman, they're like ever present. And that's kind of what she said was actually one of the ways that women use to kind of control other women, is they try to use like this guilt and shame and stuff like that. And it's like, it doesn't affect me, but for women, it can be very profound in the impacts that it has.
Indeed. Whenever you are surprised by your woman's actions and you say to her, "But you said," you are forgetting she has a feminine essence. What your woman says is like a cloud passing in the sky, well-formed, coherent, and unrecognizable moments later. The cloud is an expression of the precise physics of water, wind, and air. Your woman's words are expressions of the physics of her feelings, your relationship, and the nuances of the present situation, seen and unseen. A moment later, these factors will change, and so will your woman's expressions.
So one thing that makes me think about is like, so you might ask a woman, like, does she want to go to the movie tonight or something like that?
That's the next
And
example.
she could be like, no, I don't. And it's like, it's not because she actually wants to go to the movie or not, or whatever. It's probably because you've been ignoring her throughout the day, and you didn't say good morning, or you said something harsh to her or whatever. Yep. Like, it's basically about how she feels to you, not what you're actually asking about. So if somebody asks me if I want to go to Tim Hortons or if I want to go to the mall, or I just think it's like, do I want to go to the mall? And the person is asking, like, they'd really have to have made me mad or something like that for me not to, like, I kind of see it through the words that they say, not necessarily the emotions I feel towards that person. But I think for women, it's very flipped. It's like, it's all about how they're feeling towards that person in the moment. Yep. So you could have two different people ask the woman the same thing, but based on how she's feeling towards those two people, she'll give completely different responses. It's like, do you want to go to the movies? And that's somebody that's been really nice and friendly with her, and she's like, yeah. And it's like she'll even go see a movie that she doesn't want to see just because she likes how that person's been making her feel. On the flip side, it could be like the movie she most wants to see, but if the person that has been a jerk or something like that, or then she doesn't want to go, and she wants to basically use it as spite to basically be like, screw you, you were a jerk to me, so I'm going to be a jerk back to you in a certain respect.
I don't know what go so far to say it's spite, but it's more with that certain energy she feels, withdrawn and shut down, and naturally there's no pull. Like the example I wrote here is like, women are like water, and the gravity is love, so she's pulled to wherever she feels most loved. Not even to what the situation actually is, but just towards the energy of wherever she would feel that flow of love. Yeah, but look at you, understanding woman.
Yeah, it's like you taught me a lot, because before we became friends and stuff like that, these were all very perplexing concepts, and I had a very hard time like even reading a chapter of David Deida, because it just would be brain breaking, because it's kind of like topsy-turvy land. Everything is the opposite of what you expect as a man. But once you kind of recognize, it's like, oh, that's just the way it is, because men kind of assume that because we're both humans that we're going to be the same, and it's like, no, it's very different. Humans are very similar between men and women, but in these contexts it seems like polar opposites.
I just have a note here. It's like kind of like that cloud, right? You can't really hang on to a cloud. You can't really hold a cloud. You can like pin a cloud down and be like, this is the shape you were at. This is what you said earlier. It just causes misery for both parties when you try to pin them down. It's like, if you let them just flow and be free, there's value to both sides, because I guess what I meant to say is, the value of a woman's words is that she reflects the energy of the moment back to you, rather than the word itself that she's giving you.
And I think a big thing to do is that you can't control clouds, but you can actually attract them. So like one of the things I talk about with deserts and stuff like that is that deserts are often caused because we cut down all the trees and all the vegetation, and somehow it works that the wind kind of hits the trees and blows up to the clouds, and then it will actually create rain. But if you don't have those trees to kind of shift the air flows or something like that, it doesn't rain. And so I kind of think it's like that rain is kind of like the woman's love or praise and stuff like that. So there's lots of things you can do as a man to attract it, but you can't control it. It's kind of like it's something that has a causal relationship, but it's not direct. It's not like a one-to-one kind of thing.
But it's tough because men like that constants. They like that control.
Yeah. And what I see a lot of men to do to manipulate women is they try to always keep connected and stuff like that. And it works in the moment. Like I find like a lot of women I've seen in my life, it's like when they're with that man, they kind of get caught up in the emotions of that relationship. But it's kind of once that relationship has kind of spent some time apart, like in your previous relationship, after a week of not being together, you're like, oh, I need to break up. And I think as a man, ideally what you want to be able to do is be that center without being needy. It's like to allow a woman to come into your orbit without trying to force her into your orbit. It's like forcing the clouds somewhere. It's like you might be able to have some kind of control over it, whatever, but really you don't, like over the long term. And it's going to be a lot better long term for you as a man if you kind of set yourself up as a center, kind of like a sun in the solar system, and you pull a woman in with your gravity. It's like you've built this amazing life where you have great friends, you have great work, and all these kind of things. That's, to me, what you really should be doing as a man to kind of bring that amazing woman in. Whereas the natural instinct as a man is to kind of go look for it. Like I did it with like different mating markets, like going to yoga, going to swing dancing, going to all these kind of things. Thinking it's like I go attract a woman and then we go off together and have great life. But what I've kind of found is a lot more fulfilling, has equity and stuff like that, is to focus on building myself up and building my friends up and building a workplace, like work that I enjoy and hosts that I enjoy and all these kind of things. And kind of letting go of that need to have woman affirmation, all that kind of stuff. And I think that like by the time I'm 40, I'll have this really cool life with really cool friends and all that kind of stuff. And the woman I'm looking for will be naturally attracted into that, and then retained into that too. Because I think that's one of the tough parts, is that men tend to invest all they have into these women, and then are so heartbroken 10, 15, 20 years later when she leaves with the kids and half the money and all this kind of stuff. And it's like you invested all this and it's like it's gone. But you mean they're investing the wrong thing. It's like if you'd invested in your business and yourself. Like you mean for yourself, your friends, all this kind of stuff, and then kind of had a woman and children kind of as a piece of that puzzle, but you mean not the center of it.
Yeah.
That makes sense?
I mean, that's why the first part of the book is like a man's way. It's telling you about purpose and putting your energy into what's most fulfilling, which is your mission. And then the second part is dealing with women. So I like that order.
Yeah, like for like the mission, I think too is very interesting, because like we found our core values. That mine is to make the world a better place, and yours is love, and Najib's is freedom. Is that mission has always been very abstract to me, and I think it's very tricky, because for somebody first hearing these concepts, I think it's really about a 5 to 10 year journey to find out what your mission is. Like, you mean it's not something that like Deida says that just stay in a room until you find it. I haven't tried it particularly, but I don't really see how that can work, because I think what you need to do with your mission is you need to experiment, and you need to kind of take some action. Like when I first was coming out of university, I thought it was to help small business owners figure out marketing and stuff like that. But then it's like I did that and I got some wisdom and experience from it, and then it kind of narrowed down and stuff like that. So there is something to be said for your mission is kind of what's pulling you in the moment. But it's good to recognize it's like nowhere really tells you. It's like, hey, it's going to take 5, 10, 15 years of clarifying it before you kind of gotten down to a more solid mission. Yep. And I think that would have been very useful for me. It's like, hey, this isn't something that you should feel inadequate because you don't have right now, but it's something it's like, hey, you should recognize like, hey, this is something important to work on, but it'll take time and all this kind of stuff. That makes sense? Yeah.
I mean, it's been more than 10 years. I mean, my mission's always evolving, but I just got this because it's like, I was just looking at the chapter 11. If you don't know your purpose, discover it now. And then in that video, we talk a little bit more about mission, and that it's completely okay to not know what your mission is. It's more kind of the intention, I think, behind your actions. I don't know.
It's more so it's like there's things that you know you should be doing, like you have calls to or pulls to, and you can either ignore these things or you can start to take action towards them. And I think that the mission is taking action towards these things, like even though you might fail and all this kind of stuff. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to throw everything away for it. It doesn't mean you have to quit your job to become a full-time musician. But it's kind of like you need to put in half an hour a day or an hour a day or whatever it is, and just start exploring and experimenting with that. Because maybe after a month of practicing guitar, you're like, this wasn't really like that deeply fulfilling. But you can't really know that until you've taken some action. And so like, we moved into the previous house, recognized the problems with it, and we're kind of like, why God? Like, why couldn't you just put us into the great house? And I'm not sure that that's clear yet, but it's like just going on that journey. It's like recognizing you will make mistakes, but that's what makes it a fun journey. Like you think about Lord of the Rings, wasn't this perfect journey of like, oh yeah, we just go down the street and we drop the ring in the volcano and everything's done. It's like, no, you get stabbed, you get captured, kidnapped, all these kind of things. Like you go through a lot of trials and tribulations, but that's what makes it a hero's journey, a hero's adventure.
And I know it's slightly off topic from today's chapter, but I think it's important for both men and women because we both have feminine and masculine sides. And even though my first value or my highest value is love, I don't want to invest everything into a relationship because, in my past relationships, after the relationship ends, sure, I've learned and grown, but there really isn't much residual value or residual fulfillment. It's really just kind of like this flash of pleasure that fades as as painfully as it started. But whereas when I put time into my personal growth or even working on this channel or my teaching, That gives me a lot more lasting fulfillment, um, and so putting my energy into those types of investments are very valuable as well.
I think it's short, medium, and long term. Is that short love for yourself might be going and getting like the donuts and plowing them down. It's like, oh, I feel so good. But if you think about long term, it might be getting that pound of grass fed beef, or like you mean like that grass fed cheese, or whatever the food is that's kind of like long term nourishing. And it might not even taste that great in the moment. Like if you're having cod liver oil or something like that, it might not taste very good in the moment, but that's kind of like that long term love. It's kind of like, imagine this was your child that you're like trying to prepare for adulthood. It's like, do you want to give them, you mean Fruit Loops to make them happy in the moment, or do you want to give them cod liver oil and you mean grass pastured eggs and stuff like that, and bacon or something, whatever it is, for like a healthy breakfast that makes them kind of like grow into healthy adults.
Yeah, because they'll be a lot happier in the long term, with healthy skin and nails, rather than like, I don't know, flaky skin and acne.
Yep.
Okay, so this one's kind of the example that you used earlier. You might ask her, do you want to go to the movies? She reply, not really. Then you hug her and spin her around and say, let's go to the movies. And she says, okay. She's not talking about her desire to go to the movies. She's talking about the feeling of your relationship in the present moment. If after she said she didn't want to go to the movies, you said fine and sat down to watch TV, you would be missing the point. She's not really saying she doesn't want to go to the movies, even though that is what she's saying.
Yep. Not much to add on that.
Okay. I feel this on a deep level. Like, I can relate. I've done this before. And that's what I really like about Deida's work, because even though this book was written for men, it really helps me as a woman understand myself and why I do the things that I do. And it's really about listening deeper than the words. Because the emotions that a woman feel are so deep and complex, words only just scratch the surface of them. And trying to kind of see the energy behind it, why she might be saying what she's saying, is more than the words itself.
I think it's an interesting point you brought up, is that I think a lot of women don't know they're women. You know what I mean? It's like they've kind of been indoctrinated into like this feminist culture, and basically that they should be men and that they kind of should say what they mean and all these kind of things. And I think it'd be very useful to kind of understand yourself better as a woman by kind of reading into Deida's work, because I think you probably feel it a lot, where it's like, I should do one thing,
Yes.
but I do a completely another thing, and I keep doing it again and again. And why is that happening? Why can't I just change that? And I think it's because women aren't taught what women naturally do, kind of like what's the evolutionary programming to it. It's kind of like they've been taught that they should be men, and I think that's very problematic. That's
a really good point, right? Because I'm just learning to embrace my own instability and unpredictability. But I used to judge myself for it, and I try to hold myself to the decision that I made, but then suffer because of it, because I made that decision when I was feeling in a different emotional state, and then now I'm trying to follow through with it, but it just hurts every moment I'm trying to follow through on it. But now having this flexibility, allowing myself to change, is so nice. And and having a man or like a masculine partner that will allow the feminine to be that flow, rather than pin her down to a certain thing, it's very refreshing. This is not lying. For a man, or for anyone speaking in the masculine style, to say something that is not true is lying. But for the feminine, truth is a thin concept compared to the thickness of her flow of feelings. The truth of the feminine is whatever she is really feeling in this present moment. And I can't remember where I got this from, but it's like, if you want to predict what a man's gonna do, basically ask him what he's thinking about it. And if you want to ask what a woman's gonna do, ask what she's feeling about it. Yep. And so men are much more logical, and we kind of push away our emotions, and emotions just aren't nearly as strong. I believe from the brain, it's like the woman's brain has 8 times more blood or size or whatever for emotions than men's does.
And so it's like, I imagine the emotions I have, and then if I times it by 8, I don't know how I'd live. Like, you know what I mean?
It's a beautiful roller coaster. I love it.
To me, it sounds awful. Like, it just sounds like a special kind of hell, to be just controlled by your emotions, kind of feel like the puppet master, and I'm the puppet, you know what I mean? And to me, it's not very interesting, but yeah.
It's just like, it's the ocean, right? And it's the weather, and it just comes and goes, and you enjoy it. And now, like, as a woman, I don't know what it'd be like to be a man. It'd be like to not feel that. And it's like the world will feel so boring and so colorless. Like, so it's that's another kind of hell. Like, so it's interesting how it works like that. So when she says that she wants to move to Pittsburgh with you, and then after you've sold the house, she says she doesn't want to move with you, don't start yelling. But you said, when she first told you she wanted to move, she was feeling good about the relationship. When she then told you she didn't want to move, she was feeling bad about the relationship. Instead of arguing about what she said or didn't say, establish love in the intimacy first. So it's really not about, the action or the request itself. It's how she's feeling. Women just want to feel swooned in love. And if she's not feeling that, it's, she might close down or shut down, and then everything she'll say no to. But when she's open and happy, it's a lot, then she'll naturally want to be with that masculine force that does swoon her in love.
I think, too, it's important to remember as a man, it's like, if you're really going to be a superior man and have a superior woman, you almost have to take on the responsibility of what's going to fulfill her deeply. So, like, in this example, let's say you're moving to Pennsylvania or Pittsburgh or wherever it was, and you're doing it for work. You really have to think through, is this what's best for her, too? You mean, because we might be doing this for work, and she might do this to make me happy, and she might even feel good about the relationship. But as a superior man, you should really think through. It's like, is she gonna have friends? Is she gonna have family? Like, what's gonna, like, let's say you have kids, what's the schooling gonna be like in that area? It's like very sketchy, like all these kind of things, because women in a relationship don't necessarily are able to kind of have that masculine a lot of times. It's like that masculine kind of dies down, and they kind of are willing to sacrifice anything for that relationship. And so if you want to have a long-term sustainable relationship, I think one of the pieces is not to just have your masculine for yourself and what's going to be good for you. It's like imagining what's going to be best for her, and what's going to be best for the relationship, and what's going to be best for like the extended family. It's like you want to take on more and more levels of responsibility. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't go, and there might be sacrifices, but you should think these things through and be like, hey, we're going to go here for 3 years or something like that, and then we're going to come back because that's what I need for my career, or we're going to go there and we're going to be active in like the different social groups, and we're going to build a new social circle and stuff like that. But as that masculine, you really need to figure out what are all the needs my woman has, because I think a lot of guys just like think that the relationship is all they need, and it's like there's going to be a lot of drama associated with that, because like women need places to vent and things to do and all this kind of stuff. And if you haven't helped her build that, I feel like you're in for the roller coaster. It's like ideally you want to build the roller coaster for her in other areas of life. Like Deida talks about that with children, is that children can be a kind of inherent roller coaster that can kind of suck up a lot of women's need for that emotionality. But me as a man, I don't necessarily want that in my relationships.
I like that. And also another thing I want to add to that is, like, if you truly love someone, you want the best for them. You don't necessarily want to just hold them on to you all the time. You have to think through, does this truly serve them in the long term? And, am I going to force them to come with me, or do what I think might serve them best?
Well, it's kind of like, imagine having children and being a parent. It's like, do you want it so that they're dependent on you, and you're always getting the love and whatever neediness from it, but they can't go out into the world and make it for themselves? Or do you want to prepare them so that when it comes to 13, 16, 18, 20, whatever the age is, that they're competent and skilled and they can face the world and do all these kind of things, and they might still come back to you for some advice or for some support and stuff like that, but they don't need you, you mean? And I think that's very important to figure through.
The basic rule is this: don't believe the literal content of what your woman says unless love is flowing deeply and fully in the moment when she says it. And even then, know that she is probably talking about her current feelings, not necessarily about the subject of whatever she's talking about. Never base your plans on what a woman says she wants to do, unless she is in the full flow of love when she says it. And then expect her to change her mind at any moment when her feelings change. Remember that a woman's feelings may be more sensitive to an unseen realm of nature than are yours. Try to differentiate between your woman's shifting moods and her sensitive wisdom.
Yeah, I think it's like, as a man, it's like you want to be able to, I guess, think through what the right decision is. And you still want to have conversations with her, but it's like to look at it from a higher plane of like, not necessarily interpreting what she's saying as the gospel, but kind of being like taking it as more, I guess, indications of direction and stuff like that, and kind of like the wind and like being able to set your sail. But you kind of still are setting the direction of like what's going to be best for me, what's going to be best for her, what's going to be best for all of us, without necessarily taking her words as literal.
Yeah. And another thing I'd add, just kind of specific to this paragraph, is when she's in full flow versus when she's in tension. When she's in tension, she's withdrawn. Like, she's going to be irrational in both states, but they're going to be very different. She's going to feel very different and act very different and decide very different. And the interesting thing is, if the man is in tension, she picks up his tension and she becomes tense as well.
Well, it's like, so you were tense last night, and me just putting like the plastic bag from my meat onto the dish rack had you explode. And it's like, it's not about the meat bag on like the counter, and like if I assumed it was, I could feel so bad about myself and like how could I be so stupid, and it's not even a big deal. So it really creates a lot of cognitive dissonance, but it's really a reflection of how she's feeling, and she's not feeling good, and this is an easy way to kind of explode. Like, obviously it's like, it might be like, okay, that's not where I really want that to be, but the response versus the stimulus are completely out of proportion.
Yeah.
And it wasn't about the response, it was more about how she is feeling.
Yep. Yeah, so that's like, don't take her words literally. It's like, it's just an indication of what's going on, her emotional state. And she also reflects your emotional state if you are not feeling well.
Yeah, and so as a man, you really want to watch your own emotions, because it's kind of like, imagine your boss coming in for work, and you can just tell he's having a bad day or whatever it is. You just know that things aren't going to necessarily go all that well for you or for the people around you. And so as that boss, it's really your responsibility to have calmness, patience, understanding, equanimity. Like, some of the best times, the times I respected my boss the most, is when I made mistakes and he was just like, yeah, like, don't do that again. Obviously, that was wrong, but not a big deal. Whereas like if he had like come down my throat on that mistake and been like, oh, you're so stupid, blah, 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 don't ever do that again, it doesn't give me the same level of respect. So it's like, as a man, it's like 100%. You want to be that imperturbable presence. Yes. So it's like, she backs like the vehicle into the post box or whatever, and instead of being like, oh my god, like, you get all emotional, you're just like, okay, like, we can fix that, not a big deal, like, and then she'll be able to come to you with these things, because if she knows that you're going to get emotional, reactive, and all that kind of stuff, she's going to hide these things.
She's going to bring it to her girlfriends instead.
Yeah, it's just not good, and she'll cut herself off from you emotionally and protect herself. So yeah.
But like, that's why this book is The Way of the Superior Man, because it's very, very difficult to be that calm in the midst of her wild storms.
Well, one thing too I'd say is it's best to prepare yourself ahead of time. So like one of the analogies David Deida gives is like a man is like the ship on the ocean going through to whatever direction, and the woman is the ocean. It's a lot easier to be calm on that ship if you are a good salesman and you've got a great ship and you understand how it all works and all that kind of stuff. If your ship has holes in it and you don't know how to work it and all this kind of stuff, the ocean will destroy you because you haven't even got your own set of you in order. And I think as a man, it's important to get your own life as in order as possible. Like, how can I get like my career as solid as I can? Like one of the advice Ty Lopez gave is like the 3% rule is like, whatever you're doing that's making you money now, take 3% of that income and reinvest it in getting better at it. So let's say you're an Uber driver or something like that. It's like take 3% of your money and maybe it's like learning better roads to drive or better car maintenance, or I don't know what it is, you mean, but there's all these kind of things that you can invest in what's already working.
Do you do that?
Not directly. Like I don't do it 3%, but you can kind of see what I invest in. Like I buy programs and stuff like that.
Yeah. Being a better leader and stuff like that.
And so I look at it as just more of like, how can I invest in my future self, of like, what skills do I need? So like marketing was one of the skills that I found very valuable. It's like, hey, like all businesses need this, but nobody wants to learn it. Leadership's been another one. Health, fitness, like I've kind of all these different areas of life I've tried to invest in myself. And I've made myself very solid. Like I feel very solid about my ability to make money now, and I feel very solid in all these different areas of life, and like even my health. It's like I'm starting to kind of crack the code of like what actually creates good health, because I've had bad health for 13 years and kind of get to see what doesn't, all that kind of stuff. And having these things figured out makes me less reactive because I'm less stressed about how to make money, how to do all these kind of things. And it allows me a lot more equanimity with the women in my life and kind of the crazy things they're going to do. It just doesn't seem so crazy. And plus I've learned about it too. Like knowing about women makes it so much easier to understand it. Because if you don't, it's just WTF.
Yeah.
But if you understand, it's just like, oh yeah, like that's just women. Like women do that. Not a big deal.
And I think, part of like being stable and rooted is having that solid life, having your solid boat. But I think another important part is just developing consciousness.
Wasn't my water.
Well, yeah, I haven't had time to make water. You don't have to drink it.
I don't plan to again.
Having that consciousness. Because that's ultimately where the true stability is. That's the only thing that is unchanging in this world where everything changes. To be rooted in consciousness, awareness of the present moment, and realize that, nothing really matters. Like, sure, she might have this crazy wild storm right now, or lie about something that I lie about something. But it's like, it's all just kind of just like these little ripples on what's, it's trivial.
Well, one thing like I think about is like I remember when I was at the gym one time and there's this really attractive girl that I wanted to talk to, and I could feel her energy, and so I kind of like went up beside her, but I was still super nervous and trying to figure it out. And what really helped was just imagining my death. Is like, when I'm dead, this won't matter. You mean it's like it seems like a big deal in this moment, but like once it's my death, it's like none of this matters. And that's kind of the way with everything, right? It's like I'm giving away a bunch of stuff on Facebook Marketplace and tractors that maybe I could have sold for $300 or something like that, or whatever. I don't know what the price is, but it's like it doesn't matter. You mean, and it's like it's much more about your attention. Where do you want to put that? Do you want to put it on your phone, or do you want to put it on the conversation we're having right now? But you mean it's just kind of having that peace and equanimity with everything.
Okay, I think we spent enough time on this paragraph. Women are not liars, although they often seem that way to men. This is why a man must ultimately be responsible for making his own decisions based on the deepest truth he can fathom. Otherwise, if he bends his course of truth to compromise for his woman's current and changing expressions, he will probably end up blaming her.
So for me, that deepest truth right now is like, so it's to make the world a better place. And then the goal 12 to me seems like the best way to do that. Like investing in myself, making 12 people around me the best versions of themselves, and then teaching them how to do the same thing with their own 12 people in their lives. And if I sacrifice that for a woman, it's like, oh yeah, like I'm gonna stop hanging out with my friends and I'm gonna stop doing all these kind of things just to be with this, attractive girl. It's like, it's, I don't know, like a Faustian bargain or whatever. It's like, you're not, it's like there's a movie that was kind of like, you could wish for anything you wanted in like this laundromat dryer, but within 24 hours it would disappear. And so I think that's a lot of it. It's like you can give up all these things that are very core to you for this woman, but whatever the time period is, that woman's going to disappear eventually because you didn't have that stable core and stable life and stuff like that. So even though she asked you to do this, it's not what she actually wants.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
And if it is, she's the wrong woman.
It's just a recipe for resentment. Compromising your deepest truth for a temporary whim, really. And it goes both ways for women and men, because I know when I compromise myself, I resent my relationships, and that's toxic for my relationships, and it poisons it, and eventually it kills it. Let's see here. You should hear what your woman has to say and feel her depth carefully. Then, after you have fully considered her input, make your best possible decision from your own deep core. This way, if your woman subsequently changes her mind, you won't resent her for compromising your path. Rather, you can enjoy her subtle sensitivity and changing emotional weather patterns. You can proceed with or modify your actions in full gear, knowing you are always making the best choice available to you, having taken her depth of wisdom and her fluctuations of expression and mood wholly into account.
I think in a lot of respects it's good to think of women like children.
What?
I think it's good practice for basically anybody. Like you really should think of anybody in life as a child.
Yeah, men and women alike, not just women.
But as a man, it's like imagine your woman's a child, and it's like, so let's say your child is like, hey, I want to go to the candy store and like buy all the candy and whatever else, or like I want to go on this trip to Disneyland and stuff like that. And so as a man, you can either just be like follow that desire and kind of give into it, which I don't think is the right idea. But you could be like, okay, it's like I could see how Disneyland could add some value, but you have to recognize it's like there's a very good chance that it's not going to work out. It's like you're going to be on this 12-hour plane ride and your child's going to be having a temper tantrum and all this kind of stuff, and you're going to get there and then they're going to be selling popcorn for $25 and you're just like, I can't. It's like, let's just go to the store and buy popcorn and bring it or whatever it is. And so you kind of have to recognize that like the woman, you get her guidance, you get her direction, you get her preferences, but it's not something you necessarily follow. You have to make your own decision, take your own responsibility for it. And you like, if you're taking your family, children to Disneyland, you have to mentally prepare that like this is going to be hell. Like they say this is a happy place on earth, but it's going to be hell. And it's like you kind of define that hell. It's like, are you going to bitch and moan about the prices of everything and the lines and the heat and all this kind of stuff? Or are you going to be like, hey, I'm mentally prepared for this. Like I've mentally set aside here how much money it's going to cost me. Here's all like the trials and tribulations I'm going to go through, and maybe prepare, like get the fast pass program, figure that out, because that can make it a lot more enjoyable. But you have to take fundamental responsibility for it. And if you haven't, you are going to live in kind of this perpetual hell of like blaming other people. And I think the first kind of core responsibility as a man is 100% responsibility for everything in your life. And once you've done that, you can take the input of other people, but fundamentally every decision you make is still your responsibility.
Yeah.
And I think that makes life much more livable.
Because it then becomes, I choose to take them to Disneyland rather than I'm going because they want me to.
Yeah, and there's so much bitterness and resentment built into that. Whereas it's like, hey, I've chosen this. You mean there's lots of mistakes, like you mean us choosing the other house. It's like it can suck. You mean, but if you're blaming the people around you for your decision, it's going to be 10 times worse.
Yeah. And I don't want to downplay the role of the feminine, that because here, you know, her input is valuable because she's able to feel things that he's not able to feel.
Yep.
He has blinders on when he's going towards his mission, and she's able to, you know, the 8 times more sensitive. So,
but I'd say children are the same thing. Children can feel things that you can't necessarily feel as well. They might not be able to articulate it as well as women, but
so you would have a child around instead of a woman.
I'm just saying, it's like if you view it in that context, it makes more sense as a man, like from my perspective.
Okay, yeah.
It's like both women and children are very sensitive to what's going on that a man might not be able to pick up and notice.
Yeah.
I think a woman's probably better at articulating it. But again, they're not going to be direct. They're not going to say exactly like, hey, here's what I think I've seen, all that kind of stuff. It's just kind of you're picking up their emotional state. And their emotional state's likely a reflection of your own emotional state. Like what's kind of going underneath the surface.
Yep. So it's valuable feedback is what I'm just saying.
Yep.
Yeah. So it's not like, oh, you know, she's being crazy, I'm just going to ignore it. But it's
No.
like you take that into account as feedback, but you don't necessarily use that 100% to act on. You just take it in as feedback.
Yeah, and to me, like, I kind of like, when the women in my life, if I've kind of got like 2 or 3 of them that have kind of like, hey, you're grumpy. It's like, I'm not generally grumpy. And like, if one of them says it, maybe. But if 2 of them say it, it's like, okay, I should probably look at myself. And it's like, maybe I haven't had enough sleep. Maybe I haven't had enough food. And I might think it's silly in the notion, but I really need to use that feedback and recognize it's like, it's probably something I'm not seeing, and it's something I should work on.
Right, but, you know, making your decision from your own deep core, that's something that can be very difficult. It takes a lot of self-awareness and clarity on your mission. It takes, like, you need to have a certain amount of assertiveness to be able to prioritize yourself like that. But it's really important, otherwise there's going to be resentment, and being clear and rooted in your mission is ultimately what allows you to hold space for her changes in mind and her emotional up and downs.
Well, to me, it's kind of like, imagine playing a video game and you come up across a character in the game. They're like, hey, can you go get like this mission to get these eggs for me? And then imagine you got your butt stomped on that mission, and then you're mad at the non-playable character in the game. It's like, no, it was your responsibility. You made the decision. They may have given you feedback and advice and direction, but fundamentally, again, you're at the center of your own universe, and you have to make your own decisions and take the responsibility for that. Does that make sense?
Okay, I think let's wrap. I think I'll try to leave the viewers with, like, you know, one key takeaway, and maybe you will have one too. Let's start with mine. I think the key takeaway from this chapter for me is just to feel deeper than her words. Her words aren't a true reflection of the words are only a reflection of what she's feeling, and so we can't base decisions on that. It's more, how are the words a reflection of the current emotional energy, and how can you use that to fine-tune your action towards your mission? Not taking the words at face value, really.
To me, it's like, I really like the idea that women are like the weather, and it's because, like, when you get like a thunderstorm or rain, you don't take it necessarily so personally. And that helps a lot. And like recognizing that with women, there's just a lot of variability, because there's just a lot of variability. And you still have to take responsibility, and you still have to recognize, like, hey, I could be doing things wrong that are creating these storms. But with women, there's just going to be storms, and like there's just going to be tears, and these are just part of the weather. And letting go of that personal responsibility in that respect, that instead of blaming myself that there's a thunderstorm, or blaming myself that my woman's crying, it might be my fault, but getting really it doesn't really even matter what happened in the past. It's more about how I respond in the present.
Yep,
So
exactly.
like guilt tripping myself about what I did in the past isn't useful. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Like he could have done something bad like in the past that made her cry now, but like if he shows up like very loving, like, and present and completely like pouring all his love into her, it's gonna melt all the resistance and open her back up.
Yep.
Cool. Well, thanks Trent for joining me today. You can leave in the comments below if you like having Trent, and if you do, I'll try to bring him back more often if he wakes up early enough. Okay, peace out.